to open the discussion around. So I'm delighted that we are joined with our Firestarter presentation by Juan José Pocaterra, co-founder and CEO of Vilca, isn't it? Biqua, which is Latin for quality of life. And you may just like to explain what that does, but then also really offer us some thoughts about the challenges that we're facing looking at this perspective around how cities need to gear up and be prepared for that fourth industrial revolution.
Sure, thank you for that. Well, first, I think you introduced very well to what would be my first point to leaving the table discussion, which is when we talk about, well, first I'm really happy that we're calling this third session Grow and then talk about the green environment. I think that the first challenge that we have there is that not necessarily I would associate or vinculate growth with the green environment. And I would call the environment in a general perspective what we should talk about, which if we only focus on the green, I'm going to show you later on the presentation why I wouldn't concentrate so much on the green, although it's really important, but to look at as the environmental growth as that surrounding or that context in which cities are built and people can actually deliver growth on a sustainable way for the future. I think 4 questions, at least for me, kind of come to mind when thinking about this discussion that we're going to have today. First is we still have in the world, and I'm going to try to put you in the context of a world that has a huge gap, as was said before, of a world that is World Economic Forum is saying it's a fractured world. So I want to try to bring you also the perspective of the emerging world, where I'm from, to see that there is so much to discuss still that we give for granted, but it's still being a discussion around the globe. And the first is, are cities intrinsically bad or good for the green environment and thus for the environment in general? There's still in the emerging world a big discussion on whether cities are actually a solutionary problem. I think the ones in this panel might agree or would agree that they are solutions, but not necessarily true. So I think it's necessary for us to kind of tackle the narrative behind cities nowadays to us how it connects between growth and sustainable development. The second question is, when we talk about growth and when we talk about environments, we need to think of where that growth is happening and will happen for the next 25 and 30 years. One of the challenges we've had, and we've discussed that in the Global Futures Council of the sessions that we had this year, is, well, we cannot approach all the solutions vinculated or related to growth and the environment and the green environment only with the developed world perspective, because there's still a lot of growth that's going to happen in that emerging world and those emerging economies and emerging intermediate cities of the world. Then I think it would be interesting to kind of enter on the correlation of growth and the risk that we're living in cities. There is a fascinating scenario in which we are where most of the risk hazards associated with environment are coming from the developed world. Then again, it's the developing world, the one that is suffering the consequences of that, of those risks. And then at the same time, we're pursuing an agenda in which green is incorporated into the word sustainability and environment, but at the same time, it could be at the expense of growth. So how can we tackle, how can we make cities actually be the perfect landscape and scenario where growth and environment come together without being a sum-zero game in which one takes part of the other or vice versa? And then I think my last question there, before kind of presenting for you guys some items that I believe for the discussion, would be how can we actually leverage then in this narrative the fact that 4 industrial revolution technologies will allow that emerging world to reduce the gap with the developed world and at the same time do it in a sustainable way, and which are those technologies that will definitely be critical for that gap to be reduced on a broader perspective. So the first thing important to know is that today the world that we live in, we only as humans occupy a little bit more than 3% of the land. But it's one of the fears of the let's say the pessimists of this evolution that we're having on the growing of cities is that that's going to, in the next 15 years, approximately come to a 10%. So we're going to grow also exponentially our presence in land just because our urban footprint is expanding, as we've said before, not on a vertical way, but rather on a horizontal way. So that is a challenge that we need to face, but we need to face it at the light of this truth that is out there, which is that growth and that environmental challenge that we're going to live is going to be in the emerging cities, intermediate cities of the world, not in the capitals of the world. It's not the Mexico cities or the Shanghais of the world where we're going to see growth, where we're going to see tensions, urban tensions come up and be challenging that environmental sustainability that we're looking for. It's going to be in those intermediate cities like Salinas in Ecuador or Oruro in Bolivia, which are small cities that are going to duplicate its population in the next 15 years, but without having the knowledge or the capacity or the technologies to do it in a sustainable way. And at the same time, we're going to be asking them to stop using the environment at the expense of growth, but they are actually cities that are wanting to grow at the same rates or at the exponential rates that other cities have had the opportunity of doing. So I think we need to use the 4IR technologies, and for the panel it would be a challenging idea. How can we actually leverage those technologies so that this gap is also being reduced? But at the same time, what we're seeing is that the effect of that, or the impact of what we're doing to the environment, as you can see in the flooding map that's behind me, is that impact in the global south is very strong, at a very high cost of recovery, and at the same time at a very high cost of adapting and mitigating it. So what we're seeing is that we're looking for a world that grows exponentially in productivity terms, but at the same time taking care of the environment, and at the same time we're asking the same world to do it in a way in which the less or the most vulnerable ones are included in the process or not left out, as it's happening today. And I'm saying this because if you get to see the CO2 emissions in the last years, where they come from and where they have an impact, which is that impact on natural disasters or catastrophes that we've seen in the last years, well, it's actually something that it's a north-south effect, and at the same time, it's something that is not helping us have a common agenda, because it's making us actually fight over that agenda instead of build it together. So I think that also from the point of a narrative, it's how can we actually engage that global north and that global south to come together on agendas that are similar in terms of sustainability and growth. In regards to the 4IR, which is obviously something that leverages its power for the future growth that we're planning globally, is we have all these technologies. But I would say that the biggest challenge that we have right now is how can we make those technologies work for the environment on a global scale, on an affordable way, so that that emerging world actually has access to those opportunities His Excellency, the Director General of Dubai, was mentioning before. If we're talking about air conditioning, like he was saying, without electricity or fuel electricity being behind, how can we actually make that an exponential technology that is available in countries like Venezuela, where, for example, one of the cities, which is Maracaibo, has one of the highest consumptions of Latin America in terms of air conditioning and cooling, just because it's a really hot place without the technologies, and it's burning a lot of fossil fuels to do so. But if you ask a person in Maracaibo whether they're willing to use other alternative sources without having the money behind to support it, or his bill going up, well, obviously the answer is going to be no. So that question is actually very critical for us to understand whether 4IR will become a revolution or will just become an essence of revolution that never delivers change as it's supposed to. And finally, I just wanted to comment quickly on why 4IR comes to be critical when thought about from a physical, digital, and biological perspective. What you see there is an initiative that we started last couple of years with the Global Agenda Council. It was Rob's Melbourne idea on how we can actually use social networks on the digital platform to bring together awareness and consciousness over our urban and green canopy. And thanks to our friends in MIT, Accessible Lab, and Carlo and his team, who's been amazing at doing this, we have two projects that are simultaneously trying to leverage the powers of digital technology to bring sustainability and the green environment, now obviously with the green incorporated, into the conversation. One is Treepedia. You're seeing right here is results presented by the Treepedia algorithm analysis that was made through the Google Images, or the Google Street View Images and how the Green View Index is covered and compared in different cities, where you have interesting findings, like for example, in that study, the one that had the best index was Tampa. Maybe for some of you might have been kind of natural thinker about it, or for some, like me, I wouldn't have thought it was Tampa, but rather another city. But that's the interesting thing when you incorporate data. And finally, what we're doing is how can we also leverage the power of social crowding and crowdsourcing that data so that it becomes not only about a Green View global index, but how can we actually generate an engagement from the individual, from the human being. And that's why we've been developing for the last year Canopy Verde, which is a counterpart of Tripedia. And what we're trying to do with that is actually have a social network like a Pokemon Go exists in individual tree data, and actually through a gamified version, try to discover what type of tree it is, so that we're giving those emerging market economies that don't even have this mapped. How can we give them the data to actually make decisions and understand how green is the city and how are we contributing individually and collectively to be part of this sustainability approach towards urban development. And at last, just leave you with the idea, because I couldn't be a representative of the emerging world if I didn't bring the emerging world to you and to the vision that we need to, and to the discussion that we really need to put in the table and in the agenda. This that you're seeing right here is why I said at the beginning that for me, growth and talking about the environment, it's not only about the green environment. Caracas, the city I come from, is one of the greenest cities in Latin America. Actually, it's always been known for its green. We have a huge mountain which is called El Ávila, which everybody falls in love when you go there. It covers most of the city. But then you have an environment and a context on which the city is developing that is not fostering innovation, that is not fostering growth, that is not fostering actually a good quality of life. And what you see right there is to the right, one of the biggest slums in all Latin America, which is Pocaterra. To the left, one of the wealthiest parts of Caracas, only divided by a highway. And the contrast of what you're having in the city, the environment that you're having, is an environment in which people are not coming together, or rather separated by infrastructure, rather separated by that physical landscape. So that's when 4IR starts to come in, and also how can we adapt that physical environmental infrastructure to actually be a kind of proximity and closeness bringer to people in the country. And if you want to see it from a very tough perspective, here is a drone video that we took this year of Petare. So as you can see, there's a lot of green, and you're going to see relatively a lot of green in this small video that I'm showing you. But you start to see the context and the reality of that surrounding, and what you see is lack of waste management, a lot of unconsciousness for the environment that we have, a huge problem of informal economy and formal economy contrasting on the same space, right next to each other. Collapse and chaos all over the place in terms of mobility, in terms of the physical infrastructure that we have, and at the same time, a contrast in which it's the daily life of most emerging cities around the world. Because this video I'm showing of Caracas is no different than what you can maybe see in cities like La Paz in Bolivia or any African city. So we need to think and start putting our minds, if we want to be a true global fourth industrial revolution, we need to put our brains on this gap be reduced, and how can those innovations accessible in places such as Dubai become accessible also in places such as Caracas. So I hope to leave everyone here with that thought, and to be provoking to our panel that, and I like this, comes from different backgrounds and contexts, on how can we actually, because I showed the video before on Caracas, because if you ask